fans, welcome to another live stream. You guys really seem to like me doing live streams, so I am doing another live stream. This time we are discussing Hamilton, the Broadway play. Now, you are probably aware that Hamilton, hey, about to file great. My plan is, since I don't want to get copyright infringement because Disney is notoriously litigious, I am going to start at 5 minutes after. So if you want to skip to 5 minutes in, I will do a countdown, 3, 2, 1, so we can all start Hamilton at the same time. I am going to start mine all the way from the very, very tippy top, by which I mean Disney does its, like, Disney intro with the explosions. And I'm going to reflect a little bit on, I'm going to try and give you as much of the history as I can. I'll probably reflect a little bit on the musical itself. How do I say? I'm going to be wearing my headphones the whole time, so hopefully I'm not screaming at you or whispering. It's hard for me to tell in the headphones. I'm just going to chat a little bit while we get to 5 minutes and people sign in. Like I said, well, I guess you can't skip ahead if you're live, now that I'm saying that out loud. But for people in the future who come on later, just skip ahead to 5 minutes. We'll do a countdown. I'll give everyone sign in a little bit of time to get prepared. Yeah, like I said, do a countdown. I do want to say, I know they are going to take a little bit of artistic license. You have to when you're making a play. Even one of this length. I mean, it's 2.5 hours long. Today we're only going to watch Act 1. We're going to do Act 2 next Sunday because I thought about doing the whole thing in one breath, and I will not. I can't. 2.5 hours is a very long time for me to chit-chat and talk about it. Thank you guys for coming, though. Drew, yeah, like I said, fire it up with your kids in 5 minutes. Maybe you put on the headphones so I'm not bothering them, or let them listen. Depends, I guess, how old your kids are and how many times you've watched it by now. I've only seen it. I only saw it once. I've been very much looking forward to it for several years, but it was only coming close to my town, supposedly this September, and it did not, or will not, I presume. So I'm really glad they finally released it. What's interesting, and perhaps this is just because I'm in revolutionary history circles on the Twitter and the Facebook, but this seems to be the most anticipated Disney movie in a very long time. And it just so happens to be about the American Revolution, which I think is very cool. And I also do want to note, before we even get started, excuse me, Lin-Manuel Miranda did a really good job with the history. There are imperfections, of course, but for the most part, he hit a lot of good notes, and I'm excited to do week 2 next week because, from my perspective, not all the songs, of course, like any Broadway play, there's some emotional, feely, touchy-feely songs, which are not history-related, but there are parts of Act 2, there are 4 or 5, maybe 6 songs that are really the best interpretation of the George Washington presidential administration that I've ever seen in television or movies or, on radio. It is, and again, I was thinking this, I've been listening to the soundtrack for a long time, so I know most of the soundtrack. But, yeah, they just a nice basic layout. Believe it or not, the rap battles really help just lay out the presidential administration. I will note that while we're watching, like I said, had listened to the soundtrack for a few years now, but have only saw the play for the first time on Friday. So there are a few things, and I'll point them out, that are different between the play and the actual movie. So we got about 1 minute for those of you signing in. At the 5-minute mark, we are going to do a 3, 2, 1 hit play, and we'll all start from the very tippy top, including the Disney castle that we all know and love so much. I will try and talk the entire time, not get distracted too much by the play. I'll try and now that I'm saying it out loud, I should be talking to you. I will try and talk to you and just listen and watch out of my peripherals. That being said, seems to be a very enthralling piece of work and will be difficult. So I'm going to put my headphones on, take a sip of water. We're about 30 seconds out, and we will watch and listen and enjoy together. Presuming you have Disney Plus. If not, put on the soundtrack or anything of that nature that you'd like to do. Excuse me. And thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time. I noticed this week you guys seem to like live videos, so we're going live. Why not? Give it a shot. And ready? 3, 2, 1, and I tricked you. 1 second. I forgot to turn off my air conditioning unit, and that would have bothered us for the next hour and a half. So, now that I've lied to you, let's try this again. Okay, we're at the top. Go back. I apologize. Here we are. 3, 2, 1, action. And here we roll in. And I don't hear much. Oh, it's a train. There it is. It's really loud. Okay. It takes a second with that train at the beginning. Thanks a lot, Disney. You had me. I find it's really interesting that they use the fireworks in the Disney opening to go with Hamilton. But like I said, it is the most anticipated Disney movie of, I don't know, forever. Well, maybe not forever, but that I can remember for a long time. Granted, I didn't have kids for a whole bunch of years there, and I wasn't watching a ton of Disney. Turn up a little bit. I like how the king is the one who gives the speech because of his authority. Although I do want to note that there's no way the king would have actually made announcements at anything like this. The king had people to do that kind of thing for him. Who's walking in? Aaron Burr. And interestingly, from my perspective, I feel like it could be argued that the star of the show is Aaron Burr. Now, of course, it's named after Hamilton. Hamilton, I believe, has the most songs, but they have almost a similar amount of songs. And in a way, Aaron Burr drives the plot almost as much as Hamilton. So they could be co-stars, so to speak. Although we'd like to look at Hamilton, or Burr as a villain for shooting Hamilton. He actually was extremely important. He was the 3rd Vice President of the United States of America. So for this intro song, yes, Hamilton was, as I believe a 14-year-old, placed in charge of a mercantile house. He had just proved to everyone that he could handle it. He was a very young man who had crazy intelligence. And he's talking about the hurricane. Yeah, Hamilton proved to his island, I want to say St. Kitts, or is it St. Croix? I'm drawing a blank on the island in the Caribbean he lived in, but a hurricane hit. Like we have hurricanes now. Back then they had hurricanes too. And he wrote this one pamphlet about the hurricane. And everyone was like, this kid? Really? His name was Alexander Hamilton, and he has a very nice white coat. Granted, I think at this point he's supposed to be a boy, teenager, but again, there's a lot of artistic license going to be used. His father actually did leave, as John Adams called him later in life. Hamilton was the bastard son of a Scotch peddler. I don't believe his father was actually Scotch. They did keep in touch. In fact, later in life, Hamilton kind of softened. For a long time, Hamilton just kind of left his childhood behind. He did soften a bit, and he did start corresponding with his father later in life. This is just a great little rap, putting it in there. Clerking for his late mother's landlord. That's the trading charter they spoke about earlier. From what I understand, he did just read a ton, but at that point there was no Disney Plus to watch, nor was there any television at all, so everyone would spend all day reading and writing letters. The elite, I should say, who could afford to, would spend all day reading and writing letters. Most people would work all day and then come home and read and write letters. Although most of the people would generally read the Bible at night. He was sent to New York by the wealthy that he grew up around who wanted to give him a shot. He actually also had an older brother who I don't know a ton about, but his older brother left earlier. I don't know if America sang for him when he came. He was just an immigrant, essentially, who arrived, though he did have certain connections he was already scheduled to go to university when he arrived in America. I am going to pop over every once in a while just to make sure there aren't any questions. If there are questions, now's time. Where died for him. John Lawrence died for him? Oh, or is he... It's confusing because the one actor whose name I don't know played both John Lawrence and his son, and they both die. Spoiler alert. I don't know if any of them died for him. Oh, I guess the son was in a duel for his father's honor, so it must be that. They are applauding. We're still going to line. Okay, now this is a problem because it says 1776, and right off the bat. Oh, first of all, we don't know when Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton first actually met. It may have been in New York City. That's where Hamilton was when the Revolution broke out. He did go to Princeton. I don't know. There's no evidence he ever punched anyone. But he would end up going to King's College. Sorry, I'm trying not to get distracted all the time. Yes, they were both orphans. Aaron Burr's grandfather, and I am going to forget his name, was a very important leader of in New England before the Revolution, well before the Revolution. So Burr was afforded a lot of opportunities, and it's interesting that they became friends. In 1776, though, they probably met by this point. There's a good chance, although they might not have met until the war actually started. Now this part's fun. These guys are so much fun. But this is horribly off. John Lawrence would not have been New York. He was from South Carolina. He would not have been in New York until well after this, if ever. I don't know that he ever made it to New York. And Marquis Lafayette was still in France. So he was not in New York. The only one in this scenario who's probably correct is Hercules Mulligan. I do know Hercules Mulligan actually participated with the Patriots in a certain battle. They later say, let's steal their cannon. And Hamilton started a company of college students at King's College, which is now known as Columbia University, called the Hearts of Oak. And the Hearts of Oak would drill in the yard of the school, and one of the people he recruited was Hercules Mulligan. And when they say, let's go steal their cannon, there was an incident where, the British were firing, and there was a battle in southern New York City, on the island of Manhattan, where Hamilton ran to the line of fire, and Hercules Mulligan was retreating, and if I'm not mistaken, Hamilton grabbed Mulligan's gun and said, basically, you're leaving? I'll take this, and ran in, and essentially led a small contingent to steal cannons while under fire, and proved his heroism right away as a 19-year-old. But Lafayette was still in France, and Lawrence was still in South Carolina. Now again, there's of course going to be artistic license, and all of these men did become friendly, although Mulligan would pretty quickly, he'd join this militia and fight in the battle, but pretty quickly become a loyalist, because he was working as a spy the whole time for the Continentals. But I'm not aware of any time that Mulligan met Lafayette or Lawrence, because he was in New York City the whole time, and they never were, because by the time the British came, Lafayette had not made it to the United States. I should pay attention to one shot. This is the big song. They tax us relentlessly. Kinda. I don't know if Hamilton really had the courage to say, you'll see my descendants, you'll see me in the history books. Although he does seem to have been very confident, I don't know if he was that forward. Again, a lot of this is his feelings, and that's interpretation based on his writings that Ron Chernow, whose book this is based on, wrote, that he then interpreted. The Marquis de Lafayette is an amazing character in American history. I've spoken about him on numerous occasions. Another orphan, this one very wealthy, who literally dressed as a woman and snuck by cover of night. Oh, he didn't dress as a woman. Did he? No, I'm confusing him with someone else. But he snuck under the cover of night. The king specifically said, Lafayette, you cannot go to America. I mean, he was born to noble birth. And he flew by night, as they say, bought a ship, manned a ship, and came to the United States. Oh, here it is. I think your pants look hot. I don't know if you've seen that meme. It's pretty hilarious. Probably my favorite meme on the interweb. They were, two of the three of them were manumitionists, is how he says it. I don't know if that's really a word. Abolition wasn't really a word used yet. It's called it manumission. It's interesting. So Hamilton, I don't know of him ever owning a slave. I did read something recently that he was involved with it a little bit, but his father-in-law, who we hear the name Philip Schuyler throughout this, play a lot, because the Schuyler sisters are Philip Schuyler's daughters. Hamilton was married at the Schuyler Mansion in Albany, New York. Philip Schuyler was one of the people who had his statue taken down in New York. We're not sure where it's going to go, because Schuyler was the biggest slave owner in New York, but one of his sons, and then his son-in-law Hamilton, who were main drivers in the New York Manumission Society that was created just after the Revolution, the war ended, and they would successfully begin gradual emancipation in 1799. As for John Lawrence, he grew up on a plantation in the South. His father, Henry Lawrence, I made a video about not long ago, was a president of the Continental Congress. Henry Lawrence would go to Europe to try and negotiate treaties. He was actually captured by the British and is, I thought, the only American to be held in the Tower of London. Although someone did contact me and say that Ethan Allen was also held in the Tower of London. I have not been able to confirm that, but it was Michael Troy from the Amrev podcast, which if you're doing dishes or you want to listen to a podcast, highly recommend the American Revolution podcast. He starts at the beginning of the Revolution and goes through. He's doing it like 2 years. He's still only in 1777. He is very well researched. I do take his opinion very seriously. I have not personally seen that confirmation, but I do know that Ethan Allen was brought to London. Blah, blah, blah. As for Henry Lawrence, when he got out of the Tower of London, he went to the... he was not an official delegate, but he did go to Paris and was involved in negotiating the Treaty of Paris that ended the war. He did not sign the Treaty of Paris, but he was there with John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin when it was ratified. He's not going to throw his weight shot. I brought that up because we were talking about slavery. So John Lawrence grew up in Henry Lawrence's household. He was his son, and he grew up on a gigantic plantation with a lot of slaves. And somehow, because of this revolutionary ideal, things were changing. It's an incredible time in history where people's minds were being opened at a rapid pace. Where John Lawrence grew up on a plantation with all these slaves, and he became a manumissionist. He wanted to abolish slavery. In fact, he contacted the South Carolina militia to try and put together, or the Continental Congress to try and put together a contingent of slaves who would fight and receive their freedom if they fought. There was issues between this and South Carolina, and he was also sent on other missions. They do mention the first Black Battalion, which arguably was from Rhode Island. There was a Black Battalion, but Lawrence didn't make that happen. As for Lafayette, never owned slaves. Lafayette was super anti-slavery. Really, even I've read letters to him to Washington when Washington, his Mount Vernon was kind of attacked or confronted by the British. Lafayette wrote back to him and he said, even though I'm paraphrasing here, but even though I hate this practice, I just wanted to let you know that he took some of your slaves. And now, last but not least, Hercules Mulligan had one slave that I know of, whose name was Cato, who not only worked in his tailor shop with him, but helped him spy on the British. They worked together spying on the British. I need to write an article about Cato. Really interesting character. Again, they didn't really have first names. I'm sorry, surnames. Many slaves, I probably shouldn't say that. Many slaves didn't have surnames. They would generally be referred to as the last name of their master. But I've never heard him called Cato Mulligan, but if he did have a last name, that probably would have been it. Let me just check over here, see if there's any questions. Did slaves as an experiment on how to free... You should check on that. Lafayette did slaves as an experiment on how to free them somewhere down south on an island. He did own slaves as an experiment. Interesting. See, that I didn't know. I do know he was always anti-slavery. Very interesting, Matthew. Thank you for pointing that out. I was not aware of that. It seems like you're saying he did it just to see how they could be freed. Let me know if that's what you mean. There's nothing rich folks love more. I wouldn't know. I've never been wealthy enough to know what rich folks love. This is where they introduced the Schuyler sisters. As I said, they're the daughters of Philip Schuyler, who was a major general in the Continental Army. I believe he was the third highest ranked major general. He was extremely wealthy. His statue was taken down because he owned most of the slaves, the most slaves in New York at the time. And specifically, New York was very interesting because New York was originally New Netherlands, and Albany was primarily Dutch. And at the outbreak of the Revolution, it's about 50-50 people of English descent and like Dutch speaking of Dutch descent, and the Schuylers were of Dutch descent. And Schuyler, north of Albany, essentially owned a manor. Like, we think of New York was like a combination of New England and the South. The South, you have these big plantations with all the slaves, and in New England you have mostly people. Even if you did own slaves, you only had maybe 5 for the wealthiest. Most people had 1 or 2 slaves who lived in the house with them or in a house on the property and were treated like family. Much like, I shouldn't smile, but much like women, slaves were looked at the same. They were children who needed to be taken care of. And in New England, they very much did try to take care of them. There was, of course, violence, and I'm not justifying slavery in any way. It was just a different way that it was viewed. Now, as for New York, Philip Schuyler, he basically owned everyone. Yes, there were slaves, people with black skin were slaves, but people with white skin were essentially serfs. They were more or less tied to the land. It wasn't an official rule, and yes, they could leave. And it is different. I'm not trying to make it sound the same. But Schuyler owned all the land and all the houses and all the property, and if you lived there, you did your work, and you gave him the results of your work, and he gave you a cut. So he's a very interesting character. I'm torn about his statue coming down, to be honest, because he really did so much, and he educated his children to the point where they helped get rid of slavery in New York. Again, times were changing. I missed one part in this. So the Schuyler sisters are singing and dancing now. She did say she was reading Thomas Paine. The literacy rates were very high, and wealthy women more than likely were reading many of the revolutionary pamphlets. And in fact, several of them, like Mercy Otis Warren, were writing the pamphlets. She does say, when I meet Thomas Jefferson, I'm going to compel him to put women in the sequel. So, several things. First, at the time, a woman would never try to compel a man to do anything. Maybe her husband, but not when I meet Thomas. You're not just going to walk up to a gentleman and say that. Again, not defending this. This is just how things work. You're not going to walk up to a gentleman and to make demands, especially one of Thomas Jefferson's stature. They said this is 1776. There are things that imply it's before 1776. If she's read the Declaration of Independence, probably late 1776. So like is artistic license. Like I said, they're allowed to do that, but timing doesn't necessarily add up. Samuel Seabury, hi everyone. Correct, yeah. Hercules Mulligan was chosen because Lynn felt it was a perfect rapper name. I did not know that. John Lawrence, definitely White Quilt. He had 2 slaves with him the entire war. Did he have slaves the entire war? Like I said, he did not. He grew into being against slavery. Later in life, Hamilton was defending one of Henry's slaves who claimed he was free, but the poor man was sent back. 1st Black Battalion meant the 1st Continental Battalion. Lafayette opposed a plantation but he used free blacks to prove it would work. Yeah, Lafayette did several things, so there's a lot to unpack there. I don't know. Oh, my dog speaks more eloquently. I don't know if Hamilton had a dog. Never thought to look it up. Don't really care. Defending one of slaves who was Hamilton never seemed to really care about slavery. He generally used abolition when it suited him, which in New York it generally did suit him to pursue abolition. The first black battalion, yes, he meant Continental Battalion. So it was confusing. First it was going to be raised in South Carolina as a South Carolina militia. South Carolina did not want anything to do that, so they went over. And the Continental Army said he could do it, but then they ran into... The reason it didn't really take place is because South Carolina was basically like, no way are you going to free these slaves, because then we'll have... Then they might want to... all the slaves might want to be free, and... it wasn't... Yes, it was racist, of course, but it wasn't just being racist. It was also trying to say, they were very much about orders. I've discussed several times. The leaders of colonial and then early America were very much about the order of law. In fact, one of the reasons they didn't like what was going on with the king, the first few parts of the Declaration of Independence are they don't like the laws and they're not being orderly. And freeing slaves might lead to uprisings and the destruction of the law. Oh, now, so you'll be back. I'm going to hop back over here. Sorry, I'm trying to listen and watch and talk and read all at the same time. So if I miss your questions, say them again. I'll try and keep up. Now, from my understanding, this guy does a great job as the king because he keeps spitting. And it's not just him on stage. It's very much, we'll say, well-known or commonly believed that the king had a tendency to spit when he talked. I don't want to do it right now because I'll be gross, but he does it several times in the play. I also love the idea of the King of England writing a heartbreak breakup song to the United States. I think that's just the most fascinating thing ever. What a great idea. And again, Lawrence did. They all did not like what was called the necessary evil of slavery. But it's hard, we often overlook it today, but it's extraordinarily hard to just simply eliminate something like slavery. And I know I sound like I'm an apologist for it, and I'm not. I'm really not. But you're essentially saying we need to destroy our economy. Look what happened right now with the sickness that's going on now. We stopped working, and the economy dropped out. Most of the people doing the work at the time to keep the economy flowing, like it or not, were slaves, and especially in the South. And the North was heavily reliant on the South because the North was a lot of their economy was based on selling things, and the things they were selling were coming from the South. So it would have bottomed out the whole country. And if that happened, they already had enough problems with hard currency and the Continental, which was the currency they made up that was valueless, to bottom out the economy would have destroyed the war effort, and they certainly would have lost. And, after you've signed the Declaration of Independence, you don't want to lose that war because you'll be hung. That being said, we do see after the war ends, and even during the war, in 1780, Pennsylvania outlaws slavery. And Massachusetts follows a year or two later. So we do see, at least in the North, slavery being pushed out. And as I said, New York is 1799, about less than 20 years, about 16, 17 years after the war itself ends. They're able to outlaw slavery. And as I said, New York was kind of a mixture between New England and the southern states. They had more slaves generally than in New England, but less than in the South. So it took them a little bit longer, but they were able to do it. I don't want to talk all about slavery, though. We should be talking about Mr. Hamilton over here. Any more questions? No, not yet. Let's see. And if I'm a little bit darker than normal, it's because It's a dark screen. I usually have a white screen to give me some light. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. I see it looks like 8 likes at this point. That's really generous of you, so I appreciate it. They're talking about the British troops in the harbor. After the British evacuated Boston in 1776, George Washington came and met the Lexington and Concord militia and formed a Continental Army in Boston. And they spent a year keeping the British from Boston. Eventually they sail out, thanks to Henry Knox and his cannons and the taking of Dorchester Heights. Excuse me. Oh, here comes Washington. Here comes. The best. So the British leave Boston. They had sent more troops from Europe, more ships, and the might of the British Army sails into New York Harbor, and you see them sailing, and they wait there for like a month and a half, just sitting in ships in the harbor. The most powerful army and navy in the history of the world. And this is what they're saying right now. And Washington is supposed to fight this with a ragtag militia of people who weren't even necessarily sure what they were fighting for. Many of them were, but when the British cannons, boom. So his success is fleeting. He's talking about people retreating. They were untrained. They were sporadically trained militias. Some of them were very well trained and in uniform. Some of them were just dudes who got their guns from their shed and were wearing whatever clothes. He's talking about needing a right-hand man. Again, a little artistic license. Oh, this part's fun. Battle damages. Yeah, they're shooting down the battery. This is the British invading New York. He wants to take a stand. This is what I was saying before. Let's steal their cannons. And he goes. So Hamilton and Washington are essentially during this in the same battle right now, but in different places. It's really interesting because you see Hamilton's point of view of like, okay guys, let's do this again. He's leading the Hearts of Oak, which I'm surprised I don't mention because it's a great name. And he's saying, come on, you know, Hercules Mulligan runs away. Like they run together in this one, but I shouldn't say that. They did go into the battle together, and they were trying to steal their cannons. Meanwhile, they're like a ragtag militia of college students that have been assembled in New York City trying to do this with the Continental Army, though they are essentially on their own. Meanwhile, Washington's leading his newly formed Continental Army from the hillside, just embarrassed and distraught. Everyone keeps running away. It's super disorganized. How are we supposed to beat the most powerful army in the history of the world with these guys? Now, as far as Burr talking to Washington, I don't know of this. I wouldn't be surprised if they certainly met. The thing was, so Aaron Burr, they don't give him credit for in this. He went and fought in Quebec. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, he was with Benedict Arnold's militia that went through the Maine wilderness to meet General Schuyler, who didn't make it, and Montgomery, General Montgomery. They met at Quebec. And Montgomery was martyred. He was killed there, and they ran in. Montgomery was killed, and then Burr was shot. No, sorry. Montgomery was killed, and then Benedict Arnold was shot and dragged from the field. That's essentially what started a chain of events that we lost Canada. Because we should have been part of us. No, as far as Hamilton and Washington, Hamilton did not want to join anyone's staff. He did want to, this is all true, he did want to be on the field. Hopefully these aren't shaking me too much noise, I just realized. He wanted to fight in the field. He wanted to prove his honor in the field. And to a large degree, Washington basically did say, like, there's no honor in dying. Like, not that there's no honor in dying, but there's more you can do if you're alive. So, again, he met Mulligan at this point, and this is essentially when they started talking about having him do some spying. Mulligan and Lafayette, he wouldn't have known. Lafayette still had not arrived in the United States at this point. I don't think he made it yet. No, not yet. And while John Lawrence would have joined the war, I don't believe he would have arrived in New York. And again, Hamilton he made his way up the ranks very quickly through his brains and his action in the field and his bravery. But he didn't necessarily meet everyone right away. We're still in... the British invaded New York at the end of 1770s. In August of 1776. This is pretty hilarious, although he calls his mama loose. I don't want to say it. I don't want to say bad words. But it wasn't. His mom was left. It's hard to make ridicule her for that. I'm going to sip some water real quick. I'm really thirsty. But what do they have in common? Ladies. Pretty hilarious. Let's see. Burr was actually on Washington's staff for a month before General Putnam. That's right. He did briefly join Washington. That is absolutely right, Tara. Thank you for the reminder. Excuse me. What I was saying is I don't know if he actually like went up and was like, "Hey, can I help?" And Washington gave him the cold shoulder. I don't see Washington corresponding or speaking to someone like that. Washington, if you read his rules of civility, let's see, do I have it? I do. In his childhood, Washington wrote these. He didn't write these rules. Someone else had written them, and he just copied them all down to learn how to be the most boring person ever, but the most well-behaved person ever. And he would never brush someone off like that. That's against the rules. So here's the Helpless song. Again, there's not a lot of history I can talk about here because it's just, I'm falling in love with Alexander Hamilton, and with this play, who isn't? It's funny, I try and be as objective as I can on this channel because we're talking about history, but I'm a little bit partial to Jeffersonian democracy. I probably would have been an anti-federalist. I'm a contrarian by nature. So when I first heard there was a play about Hamilton, let's just say I was a little bit sad. That being said, it's amazing. It's an amazing play. And as we'll get to next week, the second act is unbelievable. Lin-Manuel Miranda did such a good job of objectively showing both sides of the argument that I can sit here and listen to the Jefferson arguments in the rap and say, Jefferson won. And someone who supports Hamiltonian ideals can listen and say, no, Hamilton won. And I didn't even consider that until I heard Lin-Manuel Miranda in an interview say, oh, Hamilton wins the rap battles. And I was like, no, he doesn't. It's because he goes second. And he wrote the play. But that's how good a job he did, is I can literally disagree with the person who wrote him. Excuse me. Let's see. Now, again, it's hard to say they reference the father, Philip Schuyler, whose statue just came down. I'm a little bit partial. I have considered, there are several, I want to write, I have a few books I'm working on, like the preface. I'm going to choose one, narrow it down, and go for it, and one of the people I was working on is Philip Schuyler, so. But those take a lot more time than writing some articles. Any questions? Not yet. Excellent connection. She's helpless. We get it? I'm sorry. These songs are fun. I shouldn't make fun of them. I like the revolutionary songs a little bit more. He was fairly broke. A couple of college credits. Yeah, I guess he essentially did drop out. But he would, of course, go on to get his law degree after the war. A little place in Harlem and figure it out. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, he was in Harlem. I am not great with geography of New York City, despite growing up fairly close to it. And loving geography. Other than history nerd, I'm also kind of a geography nerd. But if you do want to know more about New York State, or New York City in particular, Simeon Dewitt was a member of the Dewitt family of New York, and he was a surveyor. He was a I forget the exact title, but like surveyor general or whatever the title is for the top surveyor in the Continental Army under Washington. He's the one who went and actually laid out the streets. He was on a commission with other people, but he was essentially the one who laid out the street grid in New York City. At the time of the Revolution, New York City was just the southern tip of Manhattan Island, and he laid out the whole rest of the grid. And he's the reason we have the number systems today. The famous avenues are east-west and streets are north-south. Or again, I'm not great with this geography, but excuse me, he laid that all out. He also surveyed the New York State military tract because they couldn't pay soldiers after the Revolution, so they decided to give them property. And a huge chunk of the middle of New York was surveyed by Simeon Dewitt and laid out. And I live there right now. So I owe Simeon Dewitt. He's one of my favorite. He's the only one of the few founders that I can say maybe came to the land my house was built on, because he surveyed this area, right? So nothing. There's unfortunately no way I could ever prove that. So I'm going to lie to myself and say it definitely happened. Now they're doing the rewind to say how Angelica was in love with him. There's like certainly an argument to be made that that's true, that they had feelings towards each other. Emotions were very different back then. I'm going to check and see. Oh, someone's reading a biography of all Hamilton's contemporaries show he was widely hated. Everyone but Washington. Yeah, I will take a side note for this. Yeah, Washington was kind of a jerk. Not Washington, Hamilton, I'm sorry. Like I said, Washington was way too boring to be a jerk. Yeah, Hamilton was very aggressive. He was what one might call power hungry, and certainly a focused politician. You could say he definitely made some enemies on the way down, and got shot for it. And he was actually challenged to several duels. He was not afraid to toe the line of what a gentleman should say when it comes to honor in the 18th century. This is probably my favorite rap in the play. Sorry to get distracted, but Ben Franklin with the Key and the Kite is either the only reference to Benjamin Franklin that I remember in this play. That being said, there are Hamill tracks which are not actually part of the play, but they've released. And there's a band called the Decembers that I've enjoyed for a very long time that play kind of old-timey Americana-sounding music. And Lin-Manuel Miranda wrote them a song called Ben Franklin's Song. Now, I will warn you, there is a great deal of profanity in it, but it's nice to actually have Ben Franklin have a song. I did get distracted. Oh, Hamilton. Hamilton's a jerk. Yeah, like, of course he is. Thanks for the national debt, man. That being said, because of what happens in the second act, and we'll talk about this next week, we do very much live in Hamilton's United States of America. Because he set us on a course of national government that took out debt to play on the national stage. And I'm not taking political sides. Again, I try not to talk about monopolitics on this channel. But we essentially live in the exact country Hamilton wanted. And despite the fact that Thomas Jefferson came around as president and tried to undo some of this, and Andrew Jackson tried to undo some of this, like, many people tried to undo some of this, essentially Woodrow Wilson came around and gave up and went with Hamilton's, like, national country. They're still saying, I'm sorry if I'm ignoring the, like, love songs and such. We're here for the American Revolution on this channel. There are certain other people I should point you at for more of the emotional content of the 18th century. No new comments? That's okay. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. Oh, I got quiet. I thought it shut down. It's just no, they're really good at suspense. They got me. It's a really well written play. I have most of my life played music also, and I dated theater people and hung out with the theater group for a while in high school, despite not being in theater myself. So, if I may do a non-historical side note, the motifs in this play are amazing. In several of the songs, they'll have, and I spent so much time with history, I forgot all the musical terminology from my youth. But the motifs counteract each other beautifully. And the suspense, they're really good at suspense. Like I said, like I literally just stopped talking to be like, what happened? Because like the way they pull off, you know, it's unbelievable. What's great about this is it does a very good job with the history despite its artistic license, while simultaneously just having great tunes. You know, I know they like to say, it's a rap musical. It's not. It's a regular musical because musicals have a variety of song types in them. It's just this is one of the first ones to add the style of rap to the rest of the variety that he uses. You know? Which that song does have some rap in it. Many of them do. I do want to note that so they're doing the marriage scene here. Alexander Hamilton was married, and Philip. I know I keep referencing Philip Schuyler again. I'm like, they took down his statue. They're gonna move it. It might go to the Schuyler Mansion. There are a few places it might go. I hope it goes to the Schuyler Mansion because the Schuyler Mansion, where my friend Jessie Sir Filippi, who I've interviewed on this channel and hope to have back, she works over at the Schuyler Mansion, where Alexander Hamilton was married. Now it wasn't a party like this. Weddings were fairly small at the time, and it seems. And I will have to have Jessie on. I'm gonna contact her today and see if I can get her on this week to talk about the wedding itself. She has told me about it when I was visiting there, but I was so enthralled by being in the place where Hamilton got married that I had trouble paying attention to what she was telling me. But yeah, it seemed to have been a small wedding because it's not that big a building. I really doubt any of the people in this scene were there, because there was a war going on and they were busy with it. Like Hercules Mulligan was pretending to be a loyalist in New York City. Yeah. Let's see. Any other questions? Yes. So Burr was dating a woman married, involved with the British. He's, his relations were with a loyal subject. I don't know how to say it too strongly. And again, there's not a ton to talk about their relationship during the war. Now this song's Theodosia. It's beautiful. What they don't get into, because it takes a while for her to grow up, Aaron Burr is given a very hard time in modern America because he, dueled with. I don't even like to say he killed Alexander Hamilton. They dueled. They were gentlemen. They agreed to this. But Theodosia Burr was given the best education you could receive in the early Republic. And I don't mean for a girl. I mean at all. Aaron Burr believed women could be as intelligent as men if they were simply given the opportunity to. And he gave his daughter Theodosia every opportunity. Her life ended fairly tragically. If I'm not mistaken, she disappeared at sea, unless I'm confusing her with someone else. But she was one of the smartest women in the young Republic because her father gave her that kind of opportunity. Aaron Burr did a lot of very great things, but as with most of the founders, they were just conflicted, flawed human beings. And it's hard to... I always try and ignore great men history, or great man history, where, like you say, George Washington won the American Revolution, and he saved us all. And like, there's more to it than that, because most people are good and bad. You know, Thomas Jefferson is the absolute best example of that. How he, like, you know, put us on a path towards liberty for all, as well as inherited the when he became president, it was the first time power had transferred from one group, one political party to another, non-violently. It barely ever happened throughout all of history. But the executive branch was transferred from one party to the other, and he didn't take out reprisals on his former foes. That's not what we were fighting for. And he gave his famous speech, we are all Republicans, we are all Federalists. If you want a cup, I got them for sale down there. T-shirts too, and stickers. And I have it because it's one of the most important lines in all of American history. We are all Americans. We're not going to go and just execute Federalists like they did in France and many other places throughout the history of mankind. They were, I don't want to say nice to each other, but so between the Declaration of Independence and his work in France, and then his transition to president, not even to work as president with the Louisiana Purchase and all that, but just the fact that he, in his inaugural speech, said we're all in this together. Amazingly important. But he's not a great man, because, you know, we all know about his slaves and his long relationship, having children with Sally Hemings, one of his slaves, who, again, not an apologist or trying to defend it or make it right, but there is a long conversation. There are scholars, notably Annette Gordon-Reed, has dedicated her life to researching that relationship. And I highly recommend you, I don't think I have any behind me, but like, highly recommend you read one of her books. Or all of her books. So good. But, I mean, Jefferson did even worse things than that. I suggest you read about his relationship with Elizabeth Moore. Go on my website. I wrote an article about it. It was the first time someone really ridiculed me. I got called a commie for writing it, because his relationship with his best friend's wife was gross. I'll just say, if you're familiar with Louis C.K., there was a lot of yucky similarities. But again, he's Thomas Jefferson. You know? And that's what, when you hear people talk about great men history, we want to avoid that. And I bring it up in relationship to Burr, because, yeah, Burr did some crappy things. He was just as politically intense as Hamilton could be. One of the reasons that led them to conflict. But he also did many great things, being third vice president of the United States, fighting in the war. And I should be paying attention. Alright, so, that's right, they were very particular. Washington learned that a good idea was to kind of, as the British moved towards a battle, run, shoot him, run away. Oh, Charles Lee. Yeah, Charles Lee was essentially the number 2 in the Continental Army. And he thought he was better than Washington. So this is the Battle of Monmouth. And Lee left. He retreated. Right, so he retreated even though Washington didn't want him to. And Washington's riding up to the battle, and he sees people retreating. He's like, what's going on? And they're like, Lee ordered a retreat. And Washington stops Lee and, like, just unloads on him. Like, this guy was not supposed to lose his cool, but he did. Every once in a while, Washington would lose his cool. And he screams at Lee in front of everyone. And they say we snatched a stalemate out of the jaws of defeat. Well said. An amazing line. Because it's essentially what happened in Monmouth in the 100-degree heat, where people are just sweating to death. No joke. Like, sweating to death. And having heat stroke all over the place. And this is one of those moments where people get respect for Washington. It's like, no, we're fighting to the death. Like, we're in this. In fact, okay, we're getting to the duel. I will get back to Washington in a moment. Alright, so they're talking about the duel. This duel did happen. The only thing that's actually kind of wrong about this is Aaron Burr was not the second for Charles Lee. It was a Major Edwards, I believe was his last name. I actually had written it down because I want to write an article about him. But this is how you would do it. It's interesting how they do the dual commandments, which I understand is a reference to a Biggie Smalls song. This is how they would do it. They would have a second, which is your number 2, so that in case you got shot to death, someone could bring you home. Excuse me. And you would have a doctor there. And the doctor would turn his back for plausible deniability. So he could say, I did not see them shoot at each other. But it also made it very difficult to research some of the history, as we'll get into next week when we talk about the Hamilton-Burr duel, because I have a ton to say about that. Yeah, so they call Lee inexperienced and ruinous. He wasn't inexperienced. Lee, much like Horatio Gates, who also gave Washington some trouble, had a lot of experience fighting in the British Army. And he first came to the United States during the French and Indian War and liked it here. So after he was done in the Army, he resigned his commission and bought land here in the United States. And that's why he was commissioned as a Major General in the Continental Army, because he had so much experience. And that's why he was the number 2 Major General, because he had so much experience. And Washington sent him down to the South early in the war to prep the South. But he thought he was better than Washington. And he retreated because he didn't care if Washington looked bad. He knew Washington would take the blame. Although he didn't expect Washington to show up screaming and have him take the blame. Lee also was, at one point, just before this, was slow to move and was captured by the British because he was just, like, taking his sweet time, despite the fact he knew they were on his tail. As for this argument between Washington and Hamilton, it wasn't specifically because of this one event, but they did get into arguments. Hamilton was one of the few people to speak up. So Washington had his what was known as Washington's family, mostly made up of younger men. Washington never had a child of his own. He did have a stepson who, during the war, was between ages of 15 to 20. He would later come and work as an aide-de-camp or work with Washington, but he was not really John Parke Custis. He was not really part of it as much as these other young men who were adopted sons to him, which there is a book if you want to read about Lafayette. If you are interested in learning about the relationship between Lafayette and George Washington, there's this book, Adopted Son. I have a link below for this Hamilton book, which is a different... I'll get to that later. But go to my link below and type it in there, and I'll get 30 cents for every book you buy. Help support the site buying through my link. But Washington Lafayette and the Friendship That Saved the Revolution. And he essentially adopted... Lafayette was orphaned. He adopted him. For all intents and purposes. And they certainly loved each other. And this is an amazing book by David A. Clary. I'll put that back up later. So the family consisted of many younger men that Washington looked at as sons who would do what he said. One of these was also Hamilton. One of these was John Lawrence. Not Hercules Mulligan. He wasn't. He was in New York this whole time. But there were several other ones. Robert Hanson Harrison was Washington's personal secretary, although he was a little bit older than most of these gentlemen. There are several throughout the war that I'm overlooking right now who served as aides de camp. Hamilton was one of the few they would all give them their opinions. Hamilton would stand up to him, which is something Washington liked to a degree, but also not something he cared for because, where'd I put it? On my lap. That was not part of the rules, man. But Hamilton does end up leaving for a while, and Washington essentially writes to have him come back. Oh, a whole bunch of stuff written down. She's the one to talk about Hamilton and slavery as well. Oh, Annette Gordon Reed? Yes, she's... Oh, Jessie Sir Philippi. Yes, she is a person we can ask about Hamilton and slavery, absolutely. I'll contact her. I didn't tell her I was going to talk about it today, so I'll let her know she's being discussed. Dueling is still killing. It's just pre-set up and could go either way. Yeah. Well, one thing. Jefferson is a great man, but not a good one. Few of us as good as we should be. That's a great way to put it. He's a great man, but not a good one. That is a really fascinating way to put it. Tarot, I'm going to steal that from you. That's okay. As for dueling is still killing, it's not necessarily how they looked at it at the time, but it's not necessarily how they didn't look at it at the time. For example, during the Hamilton-Burr duel, it was illegal to duel in New York and in New Jersey, but they were from New York, so they snuck into New Jersey, dueled, and went back, assuming they wouldn't have to go back to New Jersey. Furthermore, you didn't always necessarily kill in duels. Sometimes just going to the duel, depending on the, insult, they would not, both people would shoot into the sky and say, we're satisfied. And we'll get more into that next week, because sometimes one person was shooting the other sky, the insulted party would try and just hit a limb, which apparently, and we'll get into this next week, spoiler alert, or foreshadowing, might have been what Burr was trying to do, is you'd hit a limb, wound them, forgiven. America's favorite founding Frenchman, pushed by the rain, his big red coat, red with blood stains. So, this rap is also really fun. What's amazing about this, that it took me a while to kind of realize, in the early part, Lafayette can barely speak English. And he's saying, how do you say anarchy? Anarchy. And now here we are, 4 or 5 years later into the war, and Lafayette is spitting English like it's his first language. And that is essentially what happened. He learned better English throughout the war, speaking to English speakers, and was important actually because many of the generals in America couldn't speak French, and one of the reasons Lafayette jumped up the range so quick is because he was happy to interpret for them. In fact, when Baron von Steuben came from Prussia at Valley Forge to help form this makeshift group of militias into a cohesive army, he didn't really speak English, so he would speak I forget exactly the language translation, but he would speak one language to Lafayette, who would then speak it in English to the soldiers. I think, because as a Prussian, Steuben's first language would have been French, or some dialect of... No, I'm sorry. His first language would have been German, or some dialect of German, but French was basically one of the international languages at that point, so he probably would have spoke broken French to Lafayette, who spoke broken English to the soldiers. And yeah, essentially, I don't know if Lafayette's the one who actually told Washington to write to Hamilton, but he did. And now he's thinking about his first command. He did lead his men to a massacre. So, I made a video about this not too long ago. Washington was like 19 himself when he first joined the army, and during the French and Indian War. No, not during the French and Indian War. Before the French and Indian War, he went to Ohio Valley region, which is like western Pennsylvania, modern West Virginia, part of western Virginia, part of Kentucky, Ohio, that area. And he went out there because this land was supposed to be British, and there were French people there, and he went out to politely say, get off our land, please. And one thing led to another. Washington had trouble controlling some of the Native Americans. There was a slaughter, and the French and Indian War broke out because of George Washington not being able to handle the Native Americans he was traveling with, more or less. And the French and Indian War became known as the 7 Years' War, which Winston Churchill once called the First World War, was George Washington's fault. And shortly after that, they were ambushed. And he was embarrassed. And while most people would have gone and just resigned and gone back to his plantation, Washington kept at it and was able to redeem himself during Braddock's expedition, which was during the French and Indian War, an expedition that went across to fight off the French and Indians. And Braddock was killed in another attack, and Washington was able to organize an orderly retreat. And I know retreat doesn't sound great, it sounds like don't run away, but the fact that it was an orderly retreat when the general had been killed was very impressive. And it gave Washington a little bit of renown, not just in Virginia, but it was the first time his name was kind of heard in other colonies and in England. You're saying no sweat. Any question? I'm here, Mr. Muscle Man. I've already watched the movie 3 times. All right, then you can just listen along. So we just got to the point. Go back to France, bring freedom to my people, if given a chance. Until we meet again. So let me make sure I get this right. The French with Lafayette attacked Redoubt number 9, and Hamilton attacked Redoubt number 10 at the Battle of Yorktown. And that's where they are. They're at the Battle of Yorktown. And Lafayette, they did a great job. They took him by surprise. And he says that, I forget how he words it, but take the bullets out your gun, take the bullets out your gun. I remember how he says it. That's what they did. They went in with bayonets. And it was hand-to-hand combat. They went in stabbing dudes with their guns. Because they wanted the element of surprise. And it was extraordinarily important. Let's see. Yeah. And that's pretty much what he's going through here. And this is all true. Like, it's either that or meet the business end of a bayonet. It's really tough. Co-word is Rochambeau. Rochambeau was the admiral of the Navy, I believe. Because what happened is Yorktown was at the edge, more or less on a peninsula. It was on the ocean's edge by the Potomac. By the Potomac? I keep messing up the geography today. Chesapeake Bay. They said it. They helped me. So what happened was the French Navy came and circled the outside of Yorktown. So the British could not evacuate because the French Navy was pretty much just as mighty as the British. A little bit less, but they sent the full force and Cornwallis was trapped. So when they came in, there was nowhere to go. The siege would have ended eventually, but they had to go in before the British sent reinforcements. Sorry, it's really hard not to get distracted by all the great dancing that's going on right next to me. The one thing I couldn't get from listening to it before I saw it is the thing itself. Let's see. Okay, and now here, it's over. The battle's over, and they say the world turns upside down. I hear this drinking song they're singing, the world turns upside down. It was a drinking song, and that is what they sang. Because the idea that after 7 years, 8 years of war, well, at Yorktown it would have been 6, but the war would still not have officially been ended for 2 years. But the fact that in 6 years, a ragtag group of regular citizens could get together and beat the world's mightiest army was the opposite of what anyone ever knew. Like, how could that happen, man? And that's what they're saying. It's really not admirable, but it's amazing that they actually said that. Watched the movie times. Yeah, he said in the musical they didn't want a stray gunshot to give themselves away. Yeah, the element of surprise was really important because they had to be in close. My understanding, and I've tried to learn a lot more about military history since I started Founder of the Day because I want to provide all the information I can to you. Before that, I was never really big on military history. However, it does seem. Sorry, I got distracted again. World turned upside down. Yeah, they would not have been able to, if they were shooting, it would have taken forever and a huge loss of life trying to get in. Because they would have had to get in to get the British out anyway. So, the element of surprise is extremely important. I read Rochambeau was a clever code word because a person in the rush with Hamilton said it sounded like Rochambeau's. I've never heard that. That's really interesting. So whenever I hear Rochambeau, I think of the game where, like, you punch someone and they punch you. That's really interesting. Thank you for that tidbit, Mr. Muscleman. I noticed you changed your name to Mr. Muscleman. I like it. Where are you, Disney? Again, the king. For those of you joining us late, I'm going to point out that his spitting is something that the King of England would do when he got mad, is he would spit when he talked. It's not just him being gross. He's actually doing it's a very nuanced, it's a very nuanced tribute to the king. Excuse me one second. You're on your own. Awesome, wow. Now, he would never have said awesome now, but he would have talked down to people. Unlike George Washington's rules of civility, the king knew the rules, but was happy to break them. He was the king. Awesome. Wow. Yes, look at you. I don't know, I'm not good at accents. Don't come crawling back to me. We won't. There's a, on the Twitter, there's someone parading as Benedict Arnold, and he's been using the hashtag, I think this is the funniest thing in the world, hashtag Make America Great Britain Again. And I think that is just the funniest thing in the world. Other than the I think your pants look hot meme, which we discussed earlier. Okay. Is this... Dear Theodosia. Did we already hear Dear Theodosia, or was I talking about Theodosia during the wrong song? There are a few parts I noticed in the musical that are not on the soundtrack. Especially the stuff with John Lawrence in a little bit. So, my mistake if I was singing over the wrong song. Or did they repeat it? Now I feel bad for not talking about the other song that I thought we were listening to. I got a little ahead of myself. As I was saying before, Theodosia Burr was given an amazing education. Aaron Burr was extremely... when it comes to the thinking about women and their relationship to people, I know I've... Nancy Eisenberg, there it is. I hope my books don't fall down. I know I've talked about this before, but Fallen Founder, The Life of Aaron Burr. Did I skip backwards? No. No, I was talking about the wrong song before. Hey, someone leave me a comment. Did I accidentally go back? Well, I was... Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I'm sorry. Let me see if I can catch up. It's 1:33. Oh, man. Now I shouldn't have moved this. I'm sorry. Dead air, dead air. It's on the table. Oh, I'm gonna screw this up. I'm gonna screw this up. Oh, no. I'm sorry for the dead air. There's the king. Oh, yep. What comes next? With the king. Yeah, I was right. It was the right spot. Alright, I'm gonna be a few minutes off. Foundation. Anyway, I'm back. I don't know why I confused myself like that. I apologize. Thank you, Mr. Muscleman, for pointing out. I was in the right spot. I guess there was a song earlier I messed up. And then I got confused because it says how much time is left. And I don't know. Let's go. Let's go. Okay, now I'm at the part where John Lawrence comes out, and I'm sorry if I've messed up the feed a little bit. I should have just let it run. I thought when I was changing screens I messed it up. I'm a dummy. Now, the part with John Lawrence dying, spoiler alert, in the play, is not in the soundtrack, and that always bothered me. As someone who just never saw the play was listening to the soundtrack. I was like, why do they just ignore that he dies? Especially because in the last track of the second act, they say every other founding father gets their story told, every other founding father gets to grow old. And I'm like, John Lawrence didn't grow old, man. He was like 23 when he died. And also, Hamilton gets his story told a lot more than most founders, which is why I started my website and this channel, so we can tell the stories of the ones who actually don't get their story told, as opposed to the one who has his face on the $10 bill. Let's see. Any questions? Wait for it. Mentions the wife, Theodosia, and this song is about the daughter. That's it. That's why. Thank you, Tarot. That's why I freaked out. I went back to New York. Again, I'm going to be a little bit off because I moved it around a little bit. But talking about going to New York, getting their education. They go to New York and get their education. They both essentially joined the New York bar at approximately the same time. They do both climb the ranks. I mean, I will remind you that, yes, Hamilton became Secretary of Treasury, mostly based on his relationship with George Washington. Aaron Burr climbed from just a colonel. I believe he never rose past colonel in the Continental Army, becomes a lawyer in New York, and in less than 20 years, he's vice president of the United States of America. So he does climb, and it's interesting because they say how he likes to talk less, smile more. That is a pretty good interpretation of Aaron Burr, because Burr would essentially be a Federalist when Washington was in power, and then changed to become a Democratic Republican, as they mentioned in the second act. He becomes a Democratic Republican to run for senator, and beats Philip Schuyler, his father-in-law, to be a senator. And then he, because of that, New York was a swing state at the time. That's why the Federalist Papers were all written in New York to the people of New York. Almost all of them are addressed to the people of New York. He was chosen for the Constitutional Convention. Because New York was a swing state, and having a Democratic Republican from New York helped Jefferson win the presidency. Now, Hamilton does go to the Constitutional Convention, and he does recommend his own form of government, and he stands up and says, "We need a monarch." And he's essentially booed out of the room. We like to overlook that Hamilton's plan. I will say, Hamilton worked with James Madison to call the Constitutional Convention. Before that, they called the Annapolis Convention. And then because that didn't work, they helped call the Constitutional Convention. He was a driver behind a new federal government, but Hamilton wanted a big, strong, powerful government. And he thought a monarch was necessary. Now, he was talked out of that very quickly. He was embarrassed when he said that because of the reaction of the Continental Congress. And he goes on to quickly adjust his attitudes and support this Constitution they came up with. Now, I don't know if he ever asked Aaron Burr to write the Federalist Papers. I'm a little surprised how quickly they breeze over the Federalist Papers, because it's extraordinarily important. I don't know of, perhaps it was written in letters that someone else is aware of, but I do not know that he contacted Aaron Burr to write about it. I know he was always associated with James Madison, even though as soon as the government was established, him and Madison would jump to other parties, as we see in Act 2. Him and Madison were very much a team writing during the Constitutional Convention and writing the Federalist Papers. John Jay also writes a few, as they say. He gets sick and writes a few. Although he comes back, gets healthy, and writes one more right in the middle, like number 64, something like that. But the first 5 are John Jay. Let me see, any questions? There was a song about Theodosia dying, but they cut it. Again, like I said at the intro, Mr. Musselman, I know you came in late. There's an argument to be made that the star of the show is Aaron Burr. But it's, Hamilton. Okay, I have found a wealthy husband. He's not a lot of fun. Right? Okay, so John Barker Church came to the United States because he was running from debts he accumulated in Britain. He lived under an assumed name, which escapes me right now. Lived under an assumed name, but got hired by the Continental Army to investigate Philip Schuyler and the dealings in New York, because he ran the Northern Department. He was the 3rd highest ranking general in the Continental Army and ran the Northern Department. Now, there was a lot of infighting in the Continental Congress. Believe it or not, we like to think of them as one unified body, but it was very much disunified. So he was sent to review Philip Schuyler. So Schuyler didn't care for Barker Church at all, because he was investigating his finances and stuff, even though he was proved that there was nothing going on. So what happens is everyone's suspicious of him and they don't know why. They didn't know he was living under an assumed name. Now, as I said earlier, the Schuylers were Dutch. So when Angelica Schuyler met and fell in love with Philip Barker Church, she was, the Dutch families, it was the responsibility of the mother to give permission to a daughter to marry, not the father as we become accustomed to. And her parents said no, because no one trusted this dude. So they eloped and went to Europe. And they were in Europe when it was announced that he was under an assumed name. Now, Church did make a lot of money, and he would actually work from afar with Jebediah Wadsworth from Connecticut, who was one of the undersung financiers of the American Revolution. And they actually were working as a partnership in Europe. And after the war, their agent in New York City was Alexander Hamilton. And this was when they formed the Bank of New York, which was one of the first banks in the United States. Hamilton was starting to form it on their behalf, but then longtime Governor George Clinton was forming a separate bank, many people who were actually in New York. And Hamilton contacted them and worked with them and actually wrote back like, hey, guess what? It's in your best interest to work together and form one bank instead of two competing banks, because then we have a monopoly on banks. Yay! Again, we live in Hamilton's America. He wanted big, powerful government with elites running the show. No judgment. Not necessarily for me. Yeah, I hate that line, he is not a lot of fun. Because John Barker Church is a lot of fun. Also, it was John Barker Church's guns that Hamilton and Burr dueled with. And that Philip Hamilton and George Eaker dueled with. It was the same guns. So yeah, he was a lot of fun. And that is intermission. I'm going to pause it here. Thank you guys so much. John Carter, thank you. It escapes me. You know, you write about 800, 900 different founders, and sometimes the names, some of the information fades away. Thank you, Tarot. He asked Governor Morris, who turned it down. That's right, he did ask Governor Morris. So, there is a book, the book I was going to recommend that's in the link below is, I spoke about it the other day, it's a different book by Alexander Hamilton. The play is based on a book by Ron Chernow, who wrote a really great book on Alexander Hamilton that's based off of. Richard Brookhiser is my favorite American Revolution author. His books are short and concise and super easy to digest, and this one focuses on the growth of Hamilton politically. But I'm glad you brought up Gouverneur Morris, because somewhere behind me there is a book about Gentleman Revolutionary. Again, as I've said before, I went through a period where I took off all my book covers, but Gentleman Revolutionary, the rake who wrote the Constitution. This is the book that got me into other founders. It's by Richard Brookhiser, who wrote this book, and several others. Just came out with the John Marshall book a while ago. Gouverneur Morris, thank you, Tarot, for bringing him up, is a fascinating character. He's the one who wrote We the People and the Constitution. He's actually the one who drafted the Constitution, because he had was very eloquent with his pen. In fact, I was asked the other day which founders don't get enough credit for their writing, and Gouverneur Morris is one of them. I say Gouverneur Morris because that's how I read it for years. I have learned that it's pronounced governor, but there's a U in there. Sorry if I can't pronounce it right. Again, this is a Richard Brookhiser book. Gouverneur Morris lost his leg at one point during the war, but it wasn't because he was at war. He fell off a carriage. He was very promiscuous and had many ladies in his life. Looked down upon by many of the elites of his day, despite being amongst them. A fascinating character. I really recommend any Richard Brookhiser book. Like I said, the Hamilton link's below. If you click on that link and buy any book, I still get credit for it. I'll get like 20 or 30 cents, so put that towards the site, Founder of the Day. I will also say I've got a lot of stuff on my Patreon page. If you guys want to become patriots, as I'm calling them now, please check out the link below. Follow me on all the social media. Any way you want to contribute is super appreciated. Any other questions, let me know now. I expect next Sunday at noon to do Act 2. Sorry to disappoint you by not doing Act 2 right now, but I've had the AC off and it's getting to be 90 degrees outside, and I'm going to start sweating profusely if I don't take a little bit of a breather. We've been at it for an hour and a half, so Thank you. So many of you showed up, and that's a lot of fun. I really appreciate it. I'm glad I'm not the only one who loves the American Revolution this much. And I really appreciate those of you who are contributing to the conversation, not just asking questions, but throwing in more information and correcting me where I misspeak. I'm speaking so quickly up here that I might say something wrong on accident once in a while. Very infrequently, I would hope. But especially with this, where I'm like trying to talk, but I feel like I'm talking over someone. I feel like I'm in a musical and just chatting and being the worst person. So it's a little bit difficult. Great session and great comments for everything. That's right, Matthew. Thank you so much. I do want to give a shout out to Matthew, one of my patriots out there. I did make and eat ash cakes, which you will, I am going to edit that together and put it out there today. I did it yesterday. It is gross, but not as gross as you would think. You'll see it. For those of you interested, make sure you check out my Patreon page. Sign up as a patron, and you will see me make and eat what I thought would be a disgusting ash cake, but turned out actually pretty good. What are my thoughts on... Okay, I'm going to take these off because I paused it. Oh my god, it's sweaty in there. What are your thoughts on Hercules' line about horses in Aaron Burr, sir? Bert... I'm not. I can't find it off the top of my head. If you want to type it in, just the beginning of the line, I'll remember it. I assure you. But I'm trying to go through the whole song quickly right now. Hercules Mulligan line in Aaron Burser. I keep thinking of the line where Washington says the horses are skittish from the cannons. Burr, sir. Firing at a distance. Yeah, you'll have to remind me. I'll wait for a minute too. I will talk about it a little bit. Let me see if I can find it. I probably can't. Probably can't because it's an hour and a half to go through. But I will try. Oh, I certainly will try. Don't be with me. Aaron Burr, sir. They're fighting Washington. Oh. Oh, I'm having trouble finding it. Let's see, right there. Yeah, the line is, lock up your daughters and horses. Of course, it's hard to have intercourse over 4 sets of corsets. Oh, because lock up your daughters and horses. Oh, that's gross, man. Is that what you're referencing? This is a family channel. We're watching Disney Plus. I don't know that much about Mr. Muscleman, or the actual Hercules Mulligan, to know about his private life. I know he was married. So I think a good portion of his character, although he would have been married later in life because he was a younger man at this point, I don't know what to think about that line. Lock up your daughters and horses. Of course, it's hard to have intercourse over 4 sets of corsets. There's a lot wrong with that line that bothers me. Why would someone wear 4 sets of corsets? Because that implies it's at least... I mean, I don't know. I guess unless you call one corset a set, like a pair of pants is one pant. I still don't know why you'd wear 4 corsets. Lock up your daughters. I get it. He's being a ladies' man. And horses. Yeah. It's either he's a horse thief or that's a really gross line. Oh, I want to be like, it was a long time ago, but no, like, that wasn't. Thank you for that question. If anyone has any more questions, like I said, don't want to take up your whole day. I hope you all had a swimming 4th of July. I hope you all read the Declaration of Independence. I know a lot of people watched my video the other day. I'm sorry, I don't like to talk about modern politics. I tried not to. I just tried to say, like, hey, like, we still need to read the Declaration. So if you didn't, take 10 minutes out of your day and read it today. It's important. It's what we're celebrating. And it's more than just independence from England and being a country. It's the ideals we fight for. The ideals that we're based on. Freedom and equality. And they're hard to achieve, but we're trying. So yeah. Leave me another message. If not, I'm going to sign off. Again, if you want to be a patriot, go to my link down below, my Patreon page. I'm putting a whole bunch of fun stuff on there coming up over this week. We got some stuff coming out. I'm only 12. I was singing with it, watching with my parents, and the movie said, "Yeah, you cannot sing that line in front of your mom." Yeah, that is not the type of line you want to sing in front of your mom. Anyway, that's why I try not to elaborate. This is a family channel, although not specifically geared to children, because I think a lot of the content is for a more mature audience. Just the ideas are harder to handle, but I'm really impressed that if you are 12 years old, that you can follow along with a lot of this information, because it's difficult. And I'm glad to see that kids are getting into American history, because it's I don't know if the play itself is what got you into American history, but if it did, that's super interesting, because when I was at the Schuyler Mansion last time, I keep referencing the Schuyler Mansion, it's one of the closest museums to my house, even though it's like 2.5 hours away. There were some teenage girls there who, early teens, probably about your age, who were also interested in the Schuyler sisters because of the play. And while the play gives those of us following the Revolution for a long time something to read about and learn about and something fun, more than anything else I've seen in a long time, it's really opened people up to the American Revolution. It's brought kids in. It's fantastic. I think the course of that stuff is just jokes and rhymes. Yeah. I wanted to ask Abigail Adams phonetically wrote governor as gouverneur. Is that pronounced governor? Because I never pronounce it that way. There's a town called Governor, New York. I can't say it. As I've said before, I like read things for so many years, and that's how it is in my head, and I just can't. Even when I'm trying to actively say it correctly, I can't. There's a town in upstate New York on the Canadian border called Governor. And apparently that town was named after Governor Morris. So it does seem, from my experience, that the town is, that the name is Governor Morris. It's interesting that you have the E's there, because Gouverneur Morris sounds right. But from my perspective, Gouverneur Morris sounds right. Governor Morris sounds right. Gouverneur Morris or Governor Morris. I don't think it matters anymore. He's not around to be offended. Super fascinating, though. In 5th grade, we did an American Revolution project where we all assigned different battles. And that for sure made me interested. Yeah, great. But may have trained, and a friend of mine told me about Hamilton. Yeah, Hamilton will do it. Yeah, well, I'm glad you got obsessed with American history. It's, especially the Revolution, is so interesting because, it's a point in time where so much stuff is changing. Like, the Enlightenment period of history was about 250 years, and the American Revolution was the culmination of it. The American Revolution and then the French Revolution. And the American Revolution is everything that went right with the Enlightenment, and the French Revolution took a very sad turn for the worst. But I'm fascinated with it because people are fighting for these new, not necessarily new, but like fairly new ideals of like liberty and freedom, and asking serious questions about their government, their role in society, and what people's role should be in their country. And of course, most people were in terrible conditions at this point in time. Notably slaves, but women weren't treated very well. Poor people of all varieties, creeds and cultures were not treated very well. But it was changing, it was starting to change. Like I said, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, manumitted their slaves. They used gradual emancipation, but did it immediately. New York followed suit not long after. Connecticut, Rhode Island. You also have, at the beginning of the Revolution, you could only vote if you were a white man who owned land. And generally you could only get the land by inheriting it, and only the oldest son could inherit that land. You could buy land if you made enough wealth on your own, but there was a primogeniture and entail was the saying. And Thomas Jefferson notably fought very hard against this during the Revolution. It was a time where people had the opportunity to start doing things. So within just a few years after the Revolution, they opened it up where it wasn't just, you didn't have to own property anymore. Now, you just had to be a white man to vote. Again, not great, but steps forward. And really, we've been taking these steps forward ever since, as I said the other day. And that's what's really interesting about it. And again, people have fought in the name of freedom. I should say, people have fought for freedom around the world for centuries, based off the Declaration of Independence. Yeah, I'm not going to rant about it too long. I obviously find it extraordinarily fascinating. You can see what I'm talking about and where I'm sitting. But yeah, thank you. Again, if there are any more questions, I'd be happy to answer them. If not, I can't appreciate you guys enough coming to hang out, watching the videos. I really, it's one of the great honors of my life to just have a few, even if it's just a few of us hanging out and talking about the revolution. I have a lot of fun. I hope you do too. So with that, I guess we will get going, and I will end, as is tradition, by saying round bottom.